Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today here on Point of View. This particular day, we're going to spend some time really kind of sharing a story of inspiration, but also of real important involvement in a number of issues that we've talked about so often here on Point of View. And then we'll get back into some of the issues in the news. As you go to the website, you will notice that we have posted quite a bit of information on a number of topics relating to the vaccine, woke language, what's been happening in Cuba, some of the things we talked about yesterday, and some that we will talk about today and even on our Friday weekend edition. But I thought it would be an encouragement to you to hear a story which in some respects starts with baseball, then it goes into the issue of addiction, and even now we will also be focusing on other topics that we've addressed, things like child sex slavery and the whole issue of human trafficking. So all of that comes together under one individual who we have the privilege of talking to, and that is Kevin Malone. If you are familiar with baseball, and all of us inside this room, whether you're on this side of the microphone or on the other side of the microphone, love baseball, remember him as the general manager of the Los Angeles Dodgers. But it's worth mentioning that before that, he also, of course, had served as the assistant general manager for the Baltimore Orioles, general manager for the Montreal Expos, and much more. Since actually leaving baseball, he's also worked for Sporting News Radio, Fox Sports, and the rest, but has really dedicated himself to a couple of tasks, and one, we're going to be talking about this particular film, The Shawn Miracle, but also be talking about the fact that he has co-founded the United States Institute Against Human Trafficking. Even before that, was the founder of Protect the Path. So a lot to cover with Kevin Malone. And so first of all, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Kerby, it's a pleasure to be on with you. I think of you and your name. I think of one of my favorite players and a friend of mine, Kirby Puckett.
That's right.
A great player for the Minnesota Twins. So I love your name because Kirby Puckett was a good friend of mine. So welcome, and it's a pleasure to be on your show. Thank you.
Pretty unusual name, and so I've still had some people say, that's about the only time I hear that name like that, Kirby Puckett, and that was a good hitter, by the way. Indulge us for a minute, because we're going to be spending a lot of time talking about the film. We're going to be talking about human trafficking, but for those of us that love baseball, but even for some that do not, they might wonder, what did a general manager do? Now, if you've read Moneyball like I have, or seen the movie, which I'm sure a lot of people have, they get a little bit of an idea what it might have been like to be a general manager for the Oakland A's. But what did that entail? Because in some respects, God used some of the things in those areas later on in your life, didn't they?
Yes, he did. General managers are in charge of all baseball operations, so that has to do with overseeing scouting, the players that you draft and you sign to be part of your organization, and then player development, which is all the coaches and all the instructors that teach the players how to use their skills, how to get better, how to win. So the general manager works closely, usually with the president of the team, sometimes the owner, and tries to put together the best team. So you do that through scouting, player development, but then also you're the one that goes out and signs the free agents, and you put the major league team together. You formulate that roster to try to win championships.
And so, again, that gives you a little bit of an idea. You know, before you came on the air, we had talked about, I wonder if he was there when Kirk Gibson hit that famous home run during the World Series. And it turns out you weren't actually the manager of the Dodgers, but I think you were actually in the stadium because you were scouting, weren't you?
Well, I was at that game, Kirby. I wasn't scouting. I was kind of off. I didn't have any responsibilities. I went as more of a baseball fan. So I was in Dodger Stadium. So I saw him hobble up to the plate. The crowd was going crazy. And then when he hit that home run, I mean, I've been in a lot of stadiums that were rowdy and loud, but I had never heard anything like what I heard when he hit that home run. I thought the stadium was falling down. I thought something was going on. And it was, I mean, I wasn't a Dodger fan at the time. I was working for the Twins, and I was, but I just went and enjoyed it with my brother and some friends, and I couldn't believe the excitement, the enthusiasm, and how loud Dodger Stadium got that day.
Yeah, just incredible. I do know we have listeners out there in California. Of course, anybody that's paid any attention probably has figured out by now I was a San Francisco Giants fan because I grew up there and watched Willie Mays in center field and sat in left field and got cold watching Willie McCovey at first base and all sorts of, and of course watching Juan Marichal pitch. And that shows how old I am. I'm a real fossil, but nevertheless, I remember all of those. And I remember those battles with Don Drysdale and a variety of other individuals that would come from Los Angeles to pitch right there in Candlestick Park.
Well, that's a great ballpark. In fact, I was there the last 3 games of Candlestick's existence with Tommy Lasorda, and they actually had Kerby. I don't know if you knew this, but Kerby came out. I mean, Tommy came out and addressed all the fans. So the last 3 games in Candlestick were Dodgers and Giants, and they let Tommy tell the fans goodbye from Candlestick Park. I had never heard as many boos and people yelling at Tommy, but it was exciting. It was fun, and there was a lot, as you mentioned, a lot of great games, great players on both sides of the field. Felipe Alou and his brothers played there with the Giants. Mm-hmm. So you're talking about Sandy Koufax pitched there. So a lot of greatness between that rivalry. So it hurts me to hear that you were a Giants fan, and I'm hoping now that you've switched your alliances to a new team.
I have actually gone to a good number of those different ballparks and stadiums over the years, and have lived in different parts of the country, although I live now in Texas, and I don't know if I claim a Texas Rangers fan all the time, but, I just love to watch the game and love to see some of the great players that existed. But we're going to have to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to actually make a connection there, because while you were working in baseball, that had an impact on your family, and it takes us to one of the things I want to talk about today. We've talked about the issue of addiction. We've talked about the path that some young people can go down, even adults can as well. So we want to talk about that, and so that also is an opportunity for people, if they've never seen the Shawn Miracle, to see that, and so we'll talk about that. But then another topic that we have addressed for decades on this program has been the issue of human trafficking. I remember when we had the former member of Congress, Linda Smith, on, and this goes back 3 studios. I sometimes can't remember the years, but I can remember which studio we were in when we did the interview with her. I think I was in studio, and I literally had people at the time saying, you keep acting like this issue of human trafficking is a big issue. I really think you at Point of View have missed something here, or you're creating something that doesn't exist, because if this is really a problem, we would be hearing about this on the mainstream media. Well, I guess we were just a few years ahead of the game, because most people now know that human trafficking is a big issue. So again, one of the other elements that we have posted on the website at pointofview.net. So if you'd like to know more about Kevin, like to know more about some of these organizations that he's been a part of, especially the United States Institute Against Human Trafficking. Those are some things we're going to talk about this hour. Next hour, we will get into all sorts of issues in the news, because there is a lot to cover, and those which we don't cover today, we will certainly cover tomorrow with our weekend edition. Let's take a break. We'll continue our conversation with Kevin Malone right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, for decades, sociologists have documented the phenomenon of extended adolescence. This is where someone who is an adult still acts like a teenager. One classic example would be a 35-year-old who has part of their rent and bills covered by parents and continues to take college classes. Jean Twenge, in her latest research on the trailing edge millennials, who she calls iGen, are extending this phenomenon even further. She documents that teenagers are becoming adults even later than the last generation. She argues that teens today are less prepared for adulthood. She also adds that they are safer since the rates of car accidents and teen pregnancies have fallen dramatically. Fewer 12th graders have tried alcohol. Back in 1994, 85% had tried alcohol. Today, only 66% have tried alcohol. Only 73% of 12th graders have driver's license, down from 85% 20 years ago. One of the most dramatic differences can be found in social dating. Only about half of them have been on a date. Compare that to 83% of 12th graders who had been on a date back in 1994 by their senior year. Another dramatic difference is one that we've talked about in the past, work experience. About half of 12th graders have worked for pay, which is down from 72% in 1994. Many more are taking college prep classes or hanging out at home. Now, all of these dramatic changes have resulted in a relatively new term being used by sociologists, emerging adulthood. This is their attempt to describe a new life stage between adolescence and adulthood. All of this reminds me of the jingle, "I don't want to grow up, I'm a Toys R Us kid." Maybe it's time for adults to say to the kids, it's time to grow up. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Socialism, go to viewpoints.info/socialism. That's viewpoints.info/socialism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, Kevin Malone with us. And again, he is perhaps best known for a number of things, one of which, of course, won the best general manager in the game a number of years ago. But we're going to now focus on, first of all, the movie and the film. You can actually go to ShawnMiracle.com and see information about that. Of course, you can go to our website and find some of the things we're going to be talking about. But I guess, Kevin, the best way to start is while you're working in baseball. I think anybody that understands what it's like to be a general manager or a coach or anything, whether it's baseball or football or basketball, it is all consuming. And so talk about how working in baseball had an impact or maybe even a negative impact on your family.
Well, that's exactly right, Kerby. I felt like I was totally committed to my job, to doing the best I could. I was a workaholic. I neglected my family. I sacrificed special events with family, with my wife and kids. And because I was one of those guys that was so focused on my career and I didn't have my priorities in line. I didn't have a balanced life. So I made those sacrifices. And it really, I think, as I found out later, I thought being a good father was just putting a roof over my family's head and putting food on the table and providing them some of the things that they needed. But what I realized later was that they needed time with me. They wanted time with me. So being in baseball, it is all consuming. And the more successful that you hope to be, you have to outwork people. You have to spend a lot of time traveling and a lot of time away from the home and the family. So I failed as a husband and a father, Kerby. God gave me a second chance, and I think it impacted my family in certain ways. thank God he gave me, again, a second chance, and I'm enjoying my family these days.
Let me just for a minute too point out that we can see people from and look from the outside in, and I think it's fair to say that the Malone family had it all. General manager, you're married to Marilyn, supermom. You have Shawn, valedictorian. There from the outside looked like there were no problems. There were no cracks in the foundation. Everything was up and up. And of course, I've oftentimes said that if you just watch somebody's Facebook page, that's just the highlight reel. And even if you spend time in just a casual conversation with people, you would think they've got it all together. But peel back some of the veneer, and you find out there were some things that needed to be addressed. Is that a fair assessment of where you were?
Kerby, very fair, very accurate description that, I think it's kind of commonplace in all families. There's always things going on. There's always challenges. We live in a broken, fallen world where people are sinful, and we never really know what's going on inside someone's home. And we always, I think, trying to put on this representation that everything's great, everything's perfect. But I haven't met the perfect family yet, Kerby. But ours was, we had many blessings, and we were doing a lot of wonderful things, but there were challenges. My daughter was doing well. She was in school as well, a couple years ahead of Shawn. But, Shawn, I think, was searching for his identity. And, we as a family, my wife, as you mentioned, was super mom, making sure Shawn was at church, at Sunday school, at church camp, hanging out with other Christian kids. But I think he got to a point where he wanted his own identity, and he didn't have the faith that his mom and dad had, because he commented, "Your faith is great. I respect that. I love you guys. You help a lot of people. You love the Lord. But I just don't believe that right now." And so he set out on his own, and I think we started noticing the problem, Kerby, when in high school, either his freshman, sophomore year, his friends changed. He started running with a different crowd. Yeah. He went from running with the other athletes and academic types of folks to this kind of dark crowd that was doing drugs, drinking, partying, and his identity became more associated with those types of people, those friends. And we know the Bible says bad company corrupts good character, good morals. So you got to be careful who you're hanging out with, because it influences you. And I think that's when we noticed he started doing the drugs, and it was a battle till he got into college to the University of Southern California when he had his overdose and was declared brain dead. So it was a crazy journey, but God never left us nor forsake us. That's a promise, and he saw us through those very challenging times.
You guys said, again, you began to notice, but part of the problem, and I want to maybe learn some lessons vicariously, and I want some others to learn those. They may have children right now, and they may be thinking, well, I wonder if they're doing drugs. Well, probably not. They're good kids. And were there some signs? Were there some things? Ultimately, kind of how did you find out? That, again, I don't want to take all of from the film, because we do want to encourage people to find out more about and even watch the Shawn Miracle, but can you kind of take us down that path, because maybe we can pass on some of those tips to individuals raising their own teenage kids right now?
Well, I think it's a process as you learn, Kerby. I think that, there's little signs, there's red flags. My wife did a great job as the mom. There was curfews. She knew who most of his friends were, but, getting a call from, say, a Walgreens, hey, your son was trying to steal a bottle of alcohol. That was one instance. Or you pick your son up from being out with his friends and he smells like marijuana. Or you find those rolling papers that they used to roll up the marijuana, the joints in. Or his eyes would be red. Or he seemed to be kind of out of it. Or he was getting in more fights. Or his schoolwork was suffering. His grades were not as good for a period of time. So a lot of those are just, and you just kind of see a change in his personality and their personality. They go from someone so committed to their schoolwork and to athletics to not really caring about those things. So I think oftentimes we can tell by the personality change that something could be going on. And sometimes you learn it the hard way in maybe one instance, but sometimes it comes over the course of time when you put it all together. Because you never want to believe, I personally as a dad, I never wanted to believe that this was an issue, that maybe it was just some kind of one-time chance or one-time situation. But over the course of time, you realize, putting all these circumstances together, that there was a problem.
Listen, we can also pass on one more before we take a break, and that is when the doctors basically said, your son is gone, you didn't just take that diagnosis. You went with that, and of course that gets us into the miracle of the Shawn Miracle, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. They gave us no hope. The neurologist said, pull the feeding tube, starve him to death. He's in a coma. He's basically brain dead. If he ever wakes up, he'll be in a vegetative state, and he won't want to live his life like that. And we said, no. You're giving us no hope, but we know the God of hope. We know the God that heals and does miracles. We're going to fast and pray and put our trust and faith in God and cry out for a miracle. And the neurologist kind of scoffed at us and looked at us and said, kind of laughed at us and said, okay, well, whatever. But God answered our prayers. Praise the Lord.
Well, again, I think we'll take a break, but when we come back, I wanted to spend just a few more minutes, if we could, talking about after the fact, his recovery, maybe some things you'd like to pass on to some of our listeners about traumatic brain injury. This is a topic we've only occasionally touched on, and you perhaps have firsthand experience with that regard. Then also, I would love to spend some time talking about this issue of human trafficking, because that was one of the things that you were a co-founder of, this U.S. Institute Against Human Trafficking. And so we have a link to that on the website as well. And that is a topic that we are really concerned about and have been doing programs about. So if you find yourself saying, this is an incredible story, first of all, ShawnMiracle.com is a great way to find out some of this material. You can also, of course, click on the picture, and that will take you to Kevin. And also, you will see that it will also take you to USIAHT, which, of course, stands for the organization we're talking about, the U.S. Institute Against Human Trafficking. And those are resources that we have posted on the website. And so I would encourage you to go to the website, pointofview.net. My commentary today actually fits a little bit, and that is the whole issue of extended adolescence. You know, how in some respects we have always had teenagers making decisions that maybe aren't always so wise, and in many cases living at home. Well, we have kind of a problem that's been surfaced over the last couple of years called extended adolescence. And so that's my commentary for you today. In case you haven't had a chance to see that, you can print it out or sign up for that as well. Also, as we go into this issue of addiction and into brain injury and human trafficking, you may have a comment or question. So in the last half hour of this interview we'll do with Kevin Malone, we'll open up the phones too, give you a chance if you'd like to comment. 1-800-351-1212. And of course, half an hour from now, we'll be back into some of the issues in the news. Stay tuned. We have a lot more right after this.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @PointOfViewRTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, if you'd like to join the conversation, that number is 1-800-351-1212. Again, we are talking about, at the moment, the Shawn Miracle film, but we are privileged to have with us a little bit longer Kevin Malone, who, of course, was a general manager in baseball. Then we're going to also talk about this issue of human trafficking, and you think about all the issues that we've addressed already in terms of addiction, brain trauma, euthanasia, pulling the plug, all sorts of topics that we have put on the table. And these are the kinds of things we try to cover every single day here on Point of View. And we will be covering quite a number of issues in the news next hour. But if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. But Kevin, let me come back to you for just a minute and talk about a couple of things. First of all, I imagine most people are wondering, how is Shawn doing? If they go to ShawnMiracle.com, they'll see there's a place where you can even do an interview, or maybe even invite both you and your son to speak, so they obviously can figure out that we can't just necessarily always accept that first diagnosis from a neurologist, but they also probably are wondering, and I am as well, in terms of some of the long-term effects of what's called traumatic brain injury. Can you share some of that with us?
Well, Shawn's doing great, Kerby. He's working out every day, lifting weights. He's in great shape physically. He runs roughly 5 miles every day. So God has done a amazing, miraculous physical healing, but he's also done a spiritual healing that Shawn actually came to know the Lord. He repented of his sins. He asked God for forgiveness of his sins, and he's following Jesus. So the spiritual miracle is pretty exciting, and more important to my wife and I, that we know where he's going to spend eternity in heaven because of his relationship with Jesus Christ. But, he graduated USC about 2 years after his overdose from the Marshall School of Business at USC. He's got a minor in real estate. He's doing real estate now. But he really is trying to point people to Jesus, Kerby. So he's really seeking God as to what the ministry that God would have for him, how he can further his kingdom. He speaks, as you mentioned, and we speak together oftentimes. We'll show the movie, and he'll give a short testimony, and I'll give a little close from the Bible. And God's just been honoring that. So I appreciate you guys having us on your show, and Shawn's doing great. Thanks for asking, and we just give all the glory and praise to Jesus, to our Father in heaven, Abba, and we're just, that's why we made the movie, Kerby, was to let people know that there is a God of mercy and grace. He is real. He's genuine. He loves us. He wants to do life with us. He wants a relationship with us, and we can have that through faith in his son, Jesus. So that's why we made the movie, and that's why we tell everybody that we come in contact with about this amazing God that we love and we serve.
The movie, Kevin, came out before we had this pandemic and lockdown, and we've had some experts on the program because I write about drug abuse and addiction, and we've done programs on that and the rest. And at least one of the guests says that the best estimates are that because of this lockdown, the loneliness and all the rest, that it may have increased the amount of addiction by an additional 50%. And I've seen different numbers and percentages, but taking that at face value, it would certainly suggest that as important as that film was in the pre-pandemic days, now that we've had a whole series of things that have remarkably changed our world, we come now into what many people are calling a new normal. And I would think that showing this film, having you and your son Shawn coming to speak in a church would be even more vital than it was even before you actually wrote and did all of the things about this and actually produced the film.
Well, I would agree with you, Kerby. I think we need hope now. We live in a cancel culture where everybody's attacking each other, trying to destroy each other. We know where that comes from. The devil comes to kill, steal, and destroy. So he's out to destroy families and destroy lives. And just to mention something that you just talked about, Kerby, I just got some research and some data that that drug overdose deaths is up 30%. So in 2019, there was roughly 70,000 drug overdose deaths, and in 2020 there was almost 100,000. So we know that the deaths are up. So I would agree with you that the people addicted because they were locked up for what seemed like a year or so, that they were looking to fill that void in their life with alcohol or drugs or pornography or all the things the world says will satisfy, but it never satisfies, really. It's just a temporary kind of a fake kind of satisfaction. So I would agree with you. We're going to see in the years to come the major repercussions of this COVID virus and the shutdowns that we've all been through. And I'm just praying every day. I ask God to have mercy on America and to lead us out of this craziness that we're in.
Let's, if we can, maybe transition real quickly because we only have a little bit of time left, but we want to focus on the U.S. Institute Against Human Trafficking. And this might, for a lot of our listeners, Kevin, seem kind of like a sharp left turn. How did that come to be part of your story? Can you share that?
Yes, I was with my pastor, Francis Chan, good friend of mine still. We were in Thailand, and we went to Zoe International Safe Home, and I met 3 and 4 and 5 and 6-year-old boys and girls that had been sold as sex slaves. So I came back to the United States. This was 2009, and researched it and did some studies and found out that we had a huge problem in America with children being bought and sold for sex, and no one was talking about it. And as you mentioned, Linda Smith is a friend of mine from Shared Hope. And she was way out there, had been fighting this for years, and we've worked together on some different issues to fight human trafficking. But we've got a real problem in America. That hundreds of thousands of American boys and girls are being sold every day for sex, and 30% or more of those kids are boys. No one's talking about little boys being sex trafficked, but it's happening, and America's turned a blind eye to it, Kerby. And I thank you and everywhere you've ever been in bringing this to the attention of Americans, and that we do have a problem, making people aware, and there's things people can do to protect our kids. There's so many predators out there. We need to wake up. There's urgency. Our kids are under attack, and we need to do something about it.
Well, and again, one of the things that you just said in passing is worth coming back to is we have a problem here, because even when I first started talking about that with Linda Smith and Pure Hope and all sorts of individuals, because we have certainly done quite a bit over the years of doing different interviews on human trafficking, originally the idea is, well, yeah, that's Thailand, it's Cambodia, of course we expect that,
yeah.
But one of the largest consumers of commercial sex worldwide is the United States. So we've got a problem right here. And just the other day, I was listening to Colonel Allen West. Now, he's running for governor in the state of Texas. Whether he wins, I don't know. But somebody asked about something, and he talked about the fact that in Dallas, probably the center for sex trafficking. Of course, you can look at Austin and Houston. And so it is, I think, striking that now even individuals that are running for office are talking about human trafficking. And that is a remarkably different kind of attitude than we had, say, 10 or 20 years ago when people were denying that there was even a problem.
You're right. You're right, Kerby. And I just want to encourage Congress or Allen West and others in the Congress and the Senate and any kind of political position, do more than talk about it. Actually pass laws and protect our kids, provide resources for survivors, victims that have been trafficked. There's a lot more we can do in America to protect kids, protect adults too that are being trafficked, and provide services that they need. You know, we have the only boys traffic safe home in America, Kerby. We have a home for 5 boys in Florida, and it's the only one in America that's designated specifically to bring the services that and the help that boys that have been trafficked needed, because no one's talking about boys being trafficked here in the United States. We have a huge problem. We have to go. It's a demand and a supply issue, and we have to fight the demand. We have to change the mindset of men thinking it's okay to pay to rape our children. It's not okay. It's evil, and we need to do something about it.
Let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to kind of list the different ways in which you can be involved. Obviously, we're trying to raise awareness, and so getting education is important. Combat the demand, get not only engaged, but enraged. And then we'll talk about some of those issues, because part of it is a demand issue, which we've talked about with our friends at Pure Hope. But we want to talk about Project Reach Out, the Boys Safe Home, the trafficking-free zones, and some of these other programs. So if you find yourself saying, I'd like to know a little bit more, we, of course, have a link to this organization, which we are highlighting here today, the U.S. Institute Against Human Trafficking. It's usiaht.org. Of course, we have a link at our website, pointofview.net. We'll give you some more specifics right after these important messages.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes to Kevin Malone with us. And again, we're talking at the moment up at the United States Institute Against Human Trafficking. And you might want to know what you can do. Of course, I've oftentimes said to see something, say something. If it doesn't look right, I used an example recently of the American Airlines ticket counter, which noticed these two young girls heading off to New York. It was a one-way ticket. They were kind of giddy. They didn't seem exactly wanting to know where they were going, and they called some authorities, and turned out they were probably going to be brought into sex slavery because they were being promised that they would be models. And so there is a good example. If you see something, say something, and there are certainly some things, Kevin, that we can do. So talk about some of the projects and the programs that you have there at the Institute Against Human Trafficking.
Well, I would suggest and advise anyone that wants to learn more about it, how it works and how to get involved. Our website is really good. It's intentional in the sense that not only do we fight trafficking in our staff of about 20, but we want to raise up warriors and people that will fight themselves. So we will equip, we will train. We have various types of curriculums and trainings on our website. We have an abolitionist program where we actually will train you on what you can do in your city, your town, your community to fight human trafficking, with an emphasis on child sex trafficking. So that's the abolitionist program. So we have people all over the United States that are part of this army that we're raising up to fight against this evil. We also have as you mentioned, one of our outreach programs is we will contact people that through their phone numbers that are listed online that are being sold. We will contact them to offer them services to see if they want to get out of it, asking them if they want to get out, what can we do to help you? What would it take for you to get out of being sold? So we do that. We try to intervene there. We work with some rescue teams that can go and get children back that have been abducted or lured into sex trafficking. This trafficking-free zone is extremely important. Linda Smith at Shared Hope and some others around the country have really given it their approval, where we go into a community, Kerby, and we train and teach everyone from law enforcement to city council to the medical profession to businesses to churches to all the sectors of society. What can you do in your individual lane, in your sector of society? How can you influence others? And how can you drive out child sex trafficking? So there's different ways that we teach people how to create trafficking-free zones. We have them all over the country now. Alabama, the state of Alabama is doing a great job in that regard. And we also work with educators on what they can teach in the schools. We're working on different curriculums, and we try to get involved at the government level, the political level. I've been on Capitol Hill a lot, Kerby, and talking to senators and congressmen, congress-ladies on what they need to do, how they need to change laws and amend laws, because, it's a fact that our kids are under attack. Human trafficking is growing. It's an epidemic problem in America. People think, like you said, Kerby, it happens in other countries, which it does, but this is one of the worst countries in the world for men paying to rape our kids. So we're going after demand. We have different types of technology to try to discourage men from going online and paying someone, in particular a child, for sex to be raped. So there's a lot of different ways that individuals can get involved in this. And our website, as you mentioned a couple of times, USIAHT.org, will help you, train you, equip you, and get you into the fight.
And again, one of the things that I've pointed out is this is a multifaceted situation. We've talked in the past about abusive children, and you are on your website talk about the fact that 85% of those sold for sex were abused as children. We've talked about the dangers of the internet, and I know that you have developed an artificial intelligence technology that can kind of crawl through websites where you can find some of this dark web where buy-in and selling of victims is taking place. You mentioned, of course, a boys' safe home, and you're one of the few organizations that I know have that. And this may really surprise individuals to find out that a good number of the individuals that are trafficked are actually males, not females. You always think about this as being a female issue, and it is, but you have also identified some of these issues. So the breakdown of the family, the issue of abuse, the issue of pornography. All of that connects together. And just a few minutes ago, we were talking about Shawn's Miracle. That ties into things like euthanasia and brains and addiction and all the rest. So sometimes we say that to really confront any one of these issues, you have to look at it with a much broader scope. And I think you've illustrated that today just with these two issues we've put on the table.
Well, I appreciate that, Kerby. Thank you so much for making people aware. And we live in some interesting times, as you mentioned. That the world has changed. Our culture is different now. So we've got to be intentional about protecting our kids because they are being targeted. And social media is one of the ways they're recruited, they're groomed. About 15% are abducted and taken the way we saw in the movie Taken. But most of them it's a Romeo-style relationship where an older guy befriends a younger girl and kind of grooms her, and then it's his girlfriend, and then the next thing you know, she's doing drugs, and then she's being raped, and then she's being sold for sex on the streets. So we've got a real problem in America. We need to wake up. There's a real problem here, and I think it's a sin issue. We know because this is a perversion issue. This is darkness, and as you mentioned, pornography is oftentimes the gateway into this issue. So we need to realize that and pornography is not a victimless crime. Pornography is hurting many, many people and destroying lives. So people that say, oh, it doesn't hurt anybody for me to look at pornography, you're wrong. It's destroying lives, and you need to really do some research and find out and stop doing it because it's hurting people.
Well, if nothing else, I want to salute you, first of all, as an abolitionist wanting to address these issues of sexual trafficking, as well as a dedicated father who, after the Shawn Miracle, have used this as a way to reunite fathers and sons together. And as we started out, also just a guy that loves baseball as much as the rest of us around here. So it has just been an absolute delight to have you on the program, and hope maybe we can have you on again in the future. But wanted to point people to the various websites that we've linked on our website at pointofview.net and say thank you so very much for the work that you've done and for giving us an hour today here on Point of View.
Thank you, Kerby. God bless you and your staff, and we'll keep fighting the good fight of faith and keep praying for God to have mercy on America. Thank you, Kerby.
Thank you. Let's take a break. When we come back, I want to come back to this whole question of vaccine-related fatalities, another good piece that came out here, which I think illustrates my point. Who do you trust? There was a list of maybe 12,000 vaccine-related fatalities. The CDC says now it's closer to 6,000. Those, again, are fractions of a percent when you recognize the number of people that have been vaccinated. But it still is a question that hardly anybody else is asking. So I think we should ask it. And that's one topic we will get into just briefly. We also have a very good piece that John Stossel has done on a topic we've addressed so many times before, woke language, but he's actually done a video on that, and so we've posted kind of the 2-page commentary on this. And then I thought we might even talk about how once you stray just a little bit from what might be seen as liberal orthodoxy, J.K. Rowling is a good example of that, what has happened in her life and in the lives of many others that try to bring some common sense to the conversation. So we have a lot to cover, and we will do that right after these important messages.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/sign-up. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped, agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Back once again. If you would like to join the conversation at any point, we will have an open line this hour. Did want to cover some issues in the news, and a couple of those go back to the conversation yesterday, which we may pick up again tomorrow. And one of those is the issue of the negative impact of the vaccine. Most people argue that the vaccine is doing very well. There are some various adverse reactions, but when you compare that to the tens of millions of people that have been vaccinated, those are to be expected because people's bodies react in different sort of ways. Understandable. But one of the numbers that you would think would be pretty easy to document are deaths. I mean, after all, a person dies, you have a death certificate, you have a body. So sometimes trying to get adverse reactions, they can range from just small issues that are transitory to long-term reactions. And that would be, you would think, to be a number that would be available if people wanted to have access to it. Now, there are, I think, some forces in our society right now that don't want to talk about that. We already have too much problem with vaccine hesitation. And I was just reading today about various attempts that various state governments have been doing. I was reading, for example, what the governor of Arkansas was trying to do to get people to come and be vaccinated. And there are, of course, individuals that either are hesitant about the vaccine or are definitely not going to get it. And then, of course, that has resulted in the current administration, the Biden administration, saying that we're going to go and knock on every door and find out if you've been vaccinated and do what we can to encourage you to do so. Of course, you have all of those issues. But I didn't want to spend a lot of time on this, but I did find a good article that I think illustrates the frustration those of us who actually want to try to honestly report some of this to you, the difficulties that we have. Because you had originally on the CDC, this would be the place where you would think you would want to go to find out how many people have died either with the vaccine or because of the vaccine. And I'll leave that to other people to sort out. If you get the vaccine and die 2 days later, and I do know people that have, were they already dealing with pulmonary issues or a variety of others, so did they die because of the vaccine or with the vaccine? It's the same question we've asked of, did they die from COVID or with COVID? But here's the interesting thing. The number was 12,000. Now the number is 6,079. So stay with me for just a minute to show you there is a remarkable difference between 6,000 people dying and 12,000 people dying. Would you agree with me? Again, back to the percentage. I mean, it's a fraction of a percent of the people that have been vaccinated. We're talking about, I guess they now say 161 million fully vaccinated, which is actually a number higher than I thought. So let me stand corrected and say more than 160 million people have been vaccinated, which again makes these percentages even lower. But if you went to the CDC website, it said, quote, reports of adverse events to VAERS, and that's VAERS, and that is, of course, the whole issue of what has been reported as the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting reporting system. Anyway, the reaction to the system following vaccination includes deaths, but do not necessarily mean that a vaccine caused a health problem. Okay, so obviously they have to put that disclaimer in there as well. And so the number had been 6,000. Then the number was 12,313. And so as Alex Berenson, who's been on the program with us before, points out, that when he posted that, and this would be yesterday, he says the new figure is now received more numbers of deaths following COVID vaccine than any other vaccine combined in the 30-year history of the vaccine reporting. So once you went to 12,000, a lot of people are saying, wait a minute, 12,000, that's pretty significant. Again, it's a fraction of a fraction. I'm not minimizing it. I'm just trying to give you the honest numbers there as well. And then even with that, you've had some individuals that have assessed and are, in one case, filing a lawsuit and others speaking out. I'll just use one example in this first article because I want you to read it in its entirety so you get all of the history of it. Dr. Peter McCullough, American professor of medicine and vice chief of internal medicine at Baylor University, claimed in an interview that the database, again, this is called the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, does not record the total number of adverse reactions. And so even more so when you talk about the fact that some people might have an adverse reaction, but they don't report it, or if the reaction is not seen as significant, it's not listed. And so you've had people saying we have an underreporting on the number of people that have died. And then all of a sudden you have yesterday a statement that, wait a minute, we actually have many more people that died that we haven't heard about. And then at the end of the day, this is the government, your tax dollars at work. They went back and changed the website to say that no, they basically assumed that 6,079 people have died. And I wondered, okay, how did it run from 12,000 to 6,000? First it was 6,000, then it was 12,000, then it's down to 6,000. Are you ready for the bottom line? Again, this comes from our good friend Alex Berenson, who's been on the program here. He says it turns out that they lowered the number because somebody added 6,000 foreign death reports to the U.S. count and thus increased it from 6,079 to 12,303. That might be more numbers than you want to know, but I love his line at the end. Trust the science. Or you could put it another way, trust the bureaucrats that can't actually shoot straight and can't necessarily make a distinction. In 1 minute, tell us that there are 6,000 deaths. The same day, tell us that there are 12,000 deaths. And apparently by the end of the day, tell us, no, I guess it's only 6,000 after all. And so if you wonder why sometimes you get frustrated because people can't give you a straight answer, you can't sometimes even get a straight answer on something that I would think would be a much easier statistic on the number of people that have died. We can have a debate all day whether they died from the vaccine or with the vaccine, but even getting that number is unfortunately a really significant challenge. And that is our first article. Deborah Heine did a very good job of really helping us understand the ups and downs of the CDC numbers yesterday. And it's just one more illustration of the fact that when you read something, check the next day to see if there's a clarification, check some other sources, have some discernment, use some common sense, because even something you would think which would be as easy to document as deaths from people that have been vaccinated, even that number remarkably changed within about a 24-hour period. Let's take a break, though. When we come back, John Stossel has done some very good investigative pieces on woke language, and I thought it would be appropriate to kind of get into that before we get into a couple of other issues in the news. It's our second article, and we'll talk about that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, for decades, sociologists have documented the phenomenon of extended adolescence. This is where someone who is an adult still acts like a teenager. One classic example would be a 35-year-old who has part of their rent and bills covered by parents and continues to take college classes. Jean Twenge, in her latest research on the trailing edge millennials, who she calls iGen, are extending this phenomenon even further. She documents that teenagers are becoming adults even later than the last generation. She argues that teens today are less prepared for adulthood. She also adds that they are safer since the rates of car accidents and teen pregnancies have fallen dramatically. Fewer 12th graders have tried alcohol. Back in 1994, 85% had tried alcohol. Today, only 66% have tried alcohol. Only 73% of 12th graders have driver's license, down from 85% 20 years ago. One of the most dramatic differences can be found in social dating. Only about half of them have been on a date. Compare that to 83% of 12th graders who had been on a date back in 1994 by their senior year. Another dramatic difference is one that we've talked about in the past, work experience. About half of 12th graders have worked for pay, which is down from 72% in 1994. Many more are taking college prep classes or hanging out at home. Now, all of these dramatic changes have resulted in a relatively new term being used by sociologists, emerging adulthood. This is their attempt to describe a new life stage between adolescence and adulthood. All of this reminds me of the jingle, "I don't want to grow up, I'm a Toys R Us kid." Maybe it's time for adults to say to the kids, it's time to grow up. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Socialism, go to viewpoints.info/socialism. That's viewpoints.info/socialism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
If you've listened to Point of View any length of time, you probably heard me say more than once that anyone who can control the language oftentimes can win the debate. For example, even individuals promoting abortion will always insist that they are pro-choice. Well, who's against choice? The argument for same-sex marriage was really an argument for equality. Well, I believe in equality, and so oftentimes by changing the words, you can win the debate almost from the outset. But then there are other words that are seen as, or phrases that are seen as so maybe offensive that now the so-called woke language prohibits you from using those words. And so that's why the second article I've posted here is a piece, a column by John Stossel. Now, I'm going to read through parts of it, but one of the things I might give you as a homework assignment is not only to read his piece, but he has a link to his video, which goes into this in a little more detail, and also has a link to some examples of woke language. One of those is the whole idea of birthing people. We can't call them mothers, so we call them birthing people, because after all, a woman who now says he, now she is a woman or whatever or a woman now says she is a now he man, and again, even using the pronouns gets confusing, would be identified as birthing people. And so he uses that as his opening example and has you, well, actually, if you follow the link, watch some of the conversation that was being provided there by the budget director for the Biden administration. And the argument is we no longer can use woman, or mother, we have to use birthing people. I would imagine most of you right now just rolling your eyes or even maybe a little bit angry about the fact that our argument was we need to be more inclusive. Well, John Stossel goes on to also explain that equality has been changed to equity. Well, it hasn't actually been changed because the word equity has very definite meaning within critical race theory, and equity is different than equality. As a matter of fact, you perhaps have, if you've ever been on Facebook or anything, probably have seen the cartoon of the difference between equality and equity. And, of course, affirmative action now has changed to diversity. But here's some others, which I did not know till I watched his video, and that is the Associated Press no longer will allow you to use the word mistress. Well, then what is it? Companion, friend, or lover? So that is not allowed, and I've oftentimes said that one of the biggest offenders to this is the Associated Press guide for those people in the media, because they have this press guide, and I've had it over the years on how to identify. And, of course, it is very definitely politically twinged. Let me use a good example that we used decades ago, and it's still, I think, a frustration, because if you are for abortion, you can't be called pro-abortion, you're called pro-choice, all right? But if you're against abortion, we can't let you be called pro-life, you have to be called anti-abortion. So we use the word abortion when we talk with somebody who doesn't like abortion, but we can't use the word abortion when we talk about someone who does like abortion. And you can see very quickly how these begin to get used in ways to advance a particular agenda. Then he goes on to point out that you even have one transgender actress saying that words can be violence. Of course, she's not the only one, but saying that calling a transgender woman a man is an act of violence. And, of course, we have talked about some of this before with Jonathan Haidt and safe places, and words are violence, and we need to be protected from it. So this is just the sort of natural outcome of that as well. Well, then you have, of course, the American Booksellers Association, which apologized for promoting a book dealing with gender dysphoria. That would be an author that we actually talked with on this program as being anti-trans. By the way, in just a minute, I'm going to get to J.K. Rowling and the trouble she's got into simply by trying to speak some common sense, really from a feminist perspective, into the issue of transgender. And so, again, the Bookseller Association even said that actually talking about this issue of gender dysphoria itself is violence against trans individuals. Well, that's where then John Stossel spent some time talking with Tim Sandifer, and he said, look, it is dangerous to call words violence. He says the only way human beings can deal with one another is through language, discussion, debate. If we say that's violence, then the only way for us to relate to one another is through power. So John Stossel pushed back and said, well, you're white. Why should anyone listen to you about this? And I thought he had a very good answer. He says, because what I say or it doesn't have merit or it does. The point is, a big problem with our social justice movement is the idea that a person's mindset is controlled by their skin color. That may be called anti-racism today, but it's just plain old racism. Then he goes to, of course, the African-American who I quote in my book, or booklet, I should say, on critical race theory, John McWhorter, of course, is at Columbia, and he's got a forthcoming book come out, Woke Racism. So it'll be interesting to see when that book comes out. But again, John McWhorter says, or Dr. McWhorter says, it can be really hard for us to talk to each other because we don't know what words we're using. The idea, whatever there is white or black disparities, are supposed to call that phenomenon racism. It really never fully holds together. And so here he is a linguist pointing out that we almost can't communicate now because of the whole scale redefinition of words. Well, John Stossel's not through. He takes on the word Latinx, and actually has an individual where he points out that Latinx is used and shows a quote there. And then Sandifer says, Latino originated as a reaction by Hispanic people. They chose the word Latino or Latina, but now there's a largely white middle-class movement of social justice activists saying, no, you can't make distinctions in gender that way. And so you have to come up with the word Latinx. And at that point, John Stossel says, largely white? And he says, well, yeah, the social justice movement generally is largely white, upper-middle-class, college-educated movement. You can hardly find anyone in the Hispanic community who prefers the term Latinx. Matter of fact, John Stossel looks it up. Yeah, 4% of people that identify as Hispanic will actually go along with that term. And so finally, he talks about the fact that it's almost impossible to keep up with what is forbidden. And as an individual that used to speak on college campuses, I don't do much of it now because I'm here every day doing the radio. But when I did, I always tried to figure out, are there some ways that I can just at least not be offensive to individuals and make sure that I use the right kind of phraseology, because I want people, if they're going to reject what I say, it's rejecting the facts or the information, not the way it's communicated. But it's getting harder and harder to figure out what might be seen by at least one or two individuals or a collection of individuals as being offensive. Which brings me to something that Jay Nordlinger wrote in National Review, because he reminds us that J.K. Rowling, and you might remember her, of course, the Harry Potter fame, actually has shown a great deal of courage and independence, because she, even though she's left-wing and leftist in many ways, still has made some things which were perceived as politically incorrect, because she looks at some of the things being said by the trans movement and they seem to contradict her idea of feminism. And so he points out that Nick Cohen, who is a British journalist, has actually said, I wonder when all the celebrities who have done so well from the J.K. Rowling's work will pluck up the courage to condemn the threats she receives daily. And of course, then he says, probably never. This is very human. Almost certainly there is a biological basis for it. When a mob targets an individual, there's virtually no one who wants to stick up for that individual. And it's been interesting to see some of the people that acted in the Harry Potter series come out very quickly and either say nothing or in most cases even condemn her because they don't want to be the next target. And Jay Nordlinger ends with this story. It's one to think about. He said, I once asked Thomas Sowell, African-American economist, do people scurry up to you and whisper that they like what you're doing, like what you're writing? And Sowell chuckles and said, oh, yes, private support. That's what I call it, private support. I'm right behind you, Tom. I'm actually way behind you. And it brings us back to something else we've talked about a great deal, and the need for courage. There are some people that are going to be attacked in the future, and if they're Christians and they're actually standing up for what is right and true, we should be willing to stand with them. And I thought it was interesting to say that Tom Sowell has all sorts of people saying, I agree with you, but, I'm never going to publicly say it. I'm behind you. I'm way behind you. And unfortunately, that's what's happening in our world today, and it's a great tragedy. Let's take courage, let's take heart, and we'll have a lot more right after this.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @PointOfViewRTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Before we get back to some of the other articles I've posted here, we started off by talking about sports with Kevin Malone, and I thought for just a minute we might just focus on sports for a good example and not such a good example. And first of all, the good example, I remember Marlon Maddox used to have kind of a point of view attaboy, and if we want to resurrect that, I think this would be a good time to do that for Monty Williams. Okay, some of you may not know who he is. He's the coach of the Phoenix Suns. Okay, they lost, right? They did play in the NBA Finals, but they lost to the Milwaukee Bucks, by the way. I've had a chance to meet with a few people over the last couple of weeks that are with radio stations in Milwaukee, and they're just as thrilled as they could be. But, okay, stay with me on this. This is a very good example. By the way, let me give credit to Jay Nordlinger. I just quoted from one of his pieces about J.K. Rowling and the fact that people aren't really defending her and Thomas Sowell. I love that story. I may use it in a commentary in the future. I've really never posted any pieces by Jay Nordlinger because he does kind of scatter shots, and it doesn't fit as well for our format where we're focusing on a particular issue. But some of the scatter shots were important, and one was, of course, about what happens when you're a celebrity. In this case, a feminist, but also speaks some truth about transgender. There's one example, but here is the other example that he used, and that is probably one of the great, I think probably one of the best examples of sportsmanship I've seen in some time. Let me just read the piece and you can come to your own conclusion. Because he points out that Monty Williams is the coach of the Phoenix Suns who lost to the Milwaukee Bucks in the NBA Finals earlier this week. He says, check out this headline. Suns head coach Monty Williams visited the Bucks locker room minutes after losing the title to congratulate them in a stunning display of sportsmanship. I would agree. Let me go on. Monty Williams told the Bucks that he did not want to take away from their celebration. He just wanted to come and congratulate you guys as a man, as a coach. You guys deserved it, and I am thankful for the experience. Oh, my goodness. That is such a heartwarming expression. And the individual who wrote this actually went on to say that after a win, sportsmanship is the easiest thing in the world, but real sportsmanship comes when things didn't go your way. The Bucks are champions. Again, congratulations to the Milwaukee Bucks. But Williams set an example for the rest of the NBA on Tuesday night. And Jay Nordlinger says, yeah, and maybe for the country at large. So if you needed some encouragement, there's still people that believe in sportsmanship. I have always had a pretty high respect for the Suns coach, Monty Williams. It has increased easily another 100%. And I was very impressed that not only did he do that, but at least we have a few of these somewhat woke sports writers these days actually acknowledge that this was an example of true sportsmanship. So that's a positive on the sports element. The question I might have for some of you is, are some of you in the listening audience out there rooting for the women's soccer team to lose? You might say, that makes no sense. Well, in previous years, it probably would not. If you're not familiar, the women's soccer team, which was considered to be number one, the other day played Sweden. Now, I can think of a few situations in which, okay, maybe you would not root for the women's soccer team because, I don't know, you're Swedish and you wanted to actually root for the underdog because they were considered, I think, if I remember right, fifth. And, well, first of all the women's soccer team knelt, and then they were knocked flat, as one person put it. And so Sweden is ranked fifth, the women's soccer number one. But there were a lot of people that sort of had this, well, I'm just glad. And I've seen, I don't know about you, but I sometimes go out on Facebook and Twitter, sometimes learn not to do that, but I do. And a lot of them just seem to have thought that that was such a great comeuppance on a women's soccer team, which I still think as long as they can win some of their other games, still have a chance. But you might say, why are we playing Olympic soccer and some of these other things right now? Well, it's because you have to do eliminations. And so they are going to have to get it together if they do want to be able to play in the finals. But they were, and if you're not familiar with soccer. I tend to watch at least a lot of the highlights of soccer games. I find that watching a whole soccer game is like watching the grass grow, but I like to see some of the scoring opportunities. But when you lose 3-0 and you're the number one team, or at least seen as the number one team, that was a comeuppance for sure. And our friends at the Babylon Bee just had to have some fun with it. U.S. women's soccer team to boycott scoring goals until racism is defeated. Of course, they always like to have a little bit of fun at the expense of just about anybody, but given all the things that have been used to promote kind of the woke ideology right now, that is kind of an interesting phenomenon that I'm starting to identify, where a number of Americans who always love to root for the American teams and the American athletes are taking a pass when it comes to at least a few of these athletes, especially if they turn their back during the Star-Spangled Banner, or they take a knee before the game is played, or they use this to trash the country. And you wouldn't have expected too much of that. I'm old enough to remember 1968 with at least two individuals raising their hands after winning in Mexico City, but that's been pretty much the rarity. But it's something to think about, and I'm just curious if any of you, maybe you can send us a text or an email or something like that if you feel like you maybe aren't quite as enthusiastic about rooting for the women's soccer team this year as we come to the Olympics. If they play like they did the other day, we won't even have to talk about it. They will have been eliminated. Just before we get into a couple other issues that I have on the table, I just thought I'd also mention that this whole issue of big tech censorship is something we're going to be following. We're going to cover some of it tomorrow. But there was a very good piece that came out in Fox Business by George Farmer. Now, you might not know who he is. He is the CEO of Parler, which is kind of the conservative alternative to Twitter. I mean, it's maybe not fair to say conservative because they take a lot of different views, but it's certainly less likely to censor. And he points out in this piece how big tech censorship has been taking place for some time, but in more recent times, working now with the Biden White House, even being called out by the Biden White House for saying that we need to do what we can to do a little bit more to prevent any kind of misinformation from being shared. And he points out that a lot of this is based on this idea that this is misinformation because we have settled science. And quotes from the late author and columnist Charles Krauthammer, who once observed that the greatest drawback to the idea of settled science is there's nothing more anti-scientific than that science is settled, static, and can never be challenged, because then he goes through this pretty long list, and we've mentioned those before, of all sorts of people that said that the science was settled about COVID. Don't have to wear a mask. Now you do have to wear a mask. The settled science, he says, of 2020 now looks pretty quaint in 2021. The settled science that says that the 6 feet of separation guideline would actually minimize spread, when they later concluded that it did not. Of course, I mentioned masks and a variety of other issues, the issue of the lockdowns. He goes on for some time to just remind us that we can't make statements like settled science, especially when we're talking about something which is a new or novel pandemic. We have learned so much over the last 14, 15 months, and what was seen as settled science in 2020 turns out to be rather quaint in 2021. And of course, my favorite one, which I think is obvious because we've talked about it so often, the argument that the science has proven that the virus could not have come from the Wuhan Institute for Virology. Well, now, if anything, if you had actually taken the time to look at some of the science, and we've talked about this, even the way the genome itself seems to be constructed in that virus, as well as the inability of finding any animal carrier that has a virus that looks anything like it, were all sorts of issues alone that should have answered the question, not the least of which is to believe that it was just a coincidence that the virus broke out in a wet market in Wuhan when it's just down the street from the Institute of Virology, I think strains credulity. So if nothing else, George Farmer, I think, as he is running Parler, is a little less willing to censor ideas, because what seems like a crazy idea in 2020 turns out to be actually accurate in 2021. What was labeled as a conspiracy in 2020 turns out to be probably the best explanation in 2021. And so I thought I'd put that one on the table as just one more issue to remind us that whatever you read, see, and hear, use some discernment, use some common sense, read widely, and don't always think everything's settled, because science is never completely settled. There's always more to learn. We'll be right back.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, let me just mention real quickly as a program note that tomorrow is our weekend edition. Lathan Watts will be with us, as well as Dr. Merrill Matthews. By the way, he's written a very good piece with IPI, which is the Institute for Policy Innovation, on something else that the Biden administration is doing right now, which is actually undermining confidence in the vaccine. So while they are pointing fingers and saying the reason people aren't getting the vaccine is due to Donald Donald Trump. And just the other day, matter of fact, yesterday, I posted a piece that had a link of a kind of a mashup of all the statements being made by candidate Joe Biden, and then later President-elect Joe Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris on, I'm not going to take the vaccine because it was developed under Trump. So to say that this was all done to Donald Trump, really, Donald Trump was the one trying to develop the vaccine, and so vaccine hesitancy, I think, might not so much come from Trump supporters, although there probably are some, or even Republicans. I pointed out that a very significant number either identify as Democrat or independent in terms of those that have not had the vaccine. But interestingly enough, Dr. Merrill Matthews, because he works in this medical field, points out some things that are being done right now by the Biden administration that have gone out of their way, almost you would think intentionally, to prevent people from having trust in the vaccine. So we'll get into that tomorrow with him. We also have a piece that we wanted to cover on the dismantling of ICE, that's Immigration and Customs Enforcement. And of course, you could expect that because we have what essentially are open borders. So we'll certainly cover those issues tomorrow. As a program note, let me just mention that earlier in the first hour, we talked with Kevin Malone, and we, of course, have this link to USIAHT, which stands for the U.S. Institute Against Human Trafficking. We also mentioned the Shawn Miracle, and we now have a link to ShawnMiracle.com in case you'd like to see that film. So all of that is available on the website. And just as one other statement real quickly, my commentary today is on extended adolescence, in which sociologists have documented the phenomenon of adolescence. Adolescence almost didn't exist a century or two ago. You either were a child or you were an adult. Oftentimes people got married very young, and so there wasn't this idea of adolescence or teen years. And then over time, this extended adolescence now is beginning to be something that's addressed. Just as I quoted the other day from Gene Twenge about the whole issue of the impact of media, and especially cell phones, on the millennial generation and Generation Z. She also has done quite a bit of research and documentation on what is happening now with this whole issue of extended adolescence. So quite a number of things that are available on our website today, pointofview.net, and I hope that you'll take the time to find those. We already have talked about the articles I've posted on vaccine-related fatalities, on woke language, one that I want to get into now on Cuba, and one that I just posted, which I thought was another illustration of how you can never be liberal enough, you can never be leftist enough, because now all sorts of individuals on the left have been criticizing Jeff Bezos for his space trip. Which, by the way, would it cost $5.5 billion? Wasn't that? Let me look it up real quickly, but I think that was what it was. You know, it's so interesting that people say, oh, it's okay, people can spend their money on that. Yeah, $5.5 billion flight, which didn't, as it says, dazzle the likes of Bernie Sanders, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Elizabeth Warren, and others, because they're saying you're spending all this money and you should be paying your fair share in taxes. Also saying, well, thank you for all the people that bought through Amazon, which funded the flight. A lot of people are saying, hey, I bought from Amazon because you had good prices or it was convenient, not because I wanted to send you into space. Although there were some jokes about sending him into space and leaving him there. But those are the kinds of things that I figured would surface, and certainly will. So again, those are some articles we've posted. But as we wind down, I did spend some time this week talking about Cuba. And there is a very good piece that I thought you might want to see that we posted by Mario Sanchez. He was born in Cuba. He joined the U.S. Marines at the age of 17, and I certainly want to thank him for his service. But he reminds us that socialism has ruined Cuba, and it seeks to engulf the United States. And he points out in this that if you want to understand what this is like to live in a socialist world, he says in the fourth paragraph, visit Miami and talk to former political prisoners for proof. The American embargo, the ruse by which the dictatorship affixes blame for their incompetence and abuses, is a fantasy. Briefly, the American embargo does not prevent the world's 195 plus countries from trading with Cuba. For example, he says Canada and Spain have for decades traded with Cuba. The American embargo has never prevented food and medicines from reaching there. But what it has to do is this 6 decades old crisis is a crisis that is due to something very simple, and that is socialism. In my booklet on socialism, I even use some examples. I don't use Cuba as an example because the argument can always be, well, you've had this embargo really ever since the 1959 Cuban Revolution, and so that's why he points out that is not the case. But you can see other examples. For example, Venezuela, which still has more resources in the ground that could be exploited and turn it into one of the richest nations in the world, but has completely gone the wrong direction under socialism. Or you can use East Germany and West Germany, because even as they once again reunited East Germany and West Germany, I point out that the poorest particular region in West Germany was still richer than the richest region in East Germany. But perhaps the best example, and the one that I mentioned just the other day when we had Dr. Wayne Grudem on, is the difference between North Korea and South Korea. This country of Korea was one united country, but you can see, I think, visually the difference between North Korea, which is socialist and communist, and South Korea, which is a free market economy and democracy. And you can see that, as we point out in one of the videos that we have available on our website. You can click to our video, click on the button that says see more videos, scroll down, and you'll see one which is entitled The Korean Lights. And we point out that if you've ever seen from space a picture of that area of the world, of Asia, you will see the lights in South Korea shining very bright, not just in Seoul, Korea, but all over South Korea. And then you look at North Korea and you see darkness. And it isn't just the darkness, physical darkness. Of course, it's the spiritual darkness and it's the economic darkness. But this particular piece coming from an individual that was born in Cuba and helping us understand that in some respects we have a perfect illustration of the devastation of socialism 90 miles away from our own borders, right there in Cuba, and that he is also, like many others, concerned that what has engulfed Cuba and kept it as a backwater country and a third or even fourth-rate kind of country is something that could eventually even engulf the United States. So it's a great warning and a reminder once again that we should pay attention to things like a free market, capitalism and socialism and communism. And it's our third article, which I encourage you to read and maybe even assign it to some of your children and grandchildren to read, because it's pretty powerful about what socialism has done to Cuba and what it could do to the United States. That's all we have for today. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help behind the scenes. Tomorrow we will see you at our weekend edition right here on Point of View.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/sign-up. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.